I was there when Samuel Brooks discovered that love could cost him everything he had worked for in his 53 years of life. What started as a simple swipe right on Tinder in a Bangkok internet cafe turned into the most expensive lesson of his existence. This isn't just another romance scam story. This is about how an entire family in northern Thailand orchestrated the perfect emotional heist, and how one lonely widower became their unwitting ATM machine. Before we dive into Samuel's nightmare, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because the stories I share here will open your eyes to the dark side of modern romance. The kind of predators that hunt in plain sight, and the psychological traps that can ensnare even the smartest among us. Samuel Brooks wasn't your typical target for a romance scam. The man had built a successful consulting business in Manchester, raised 2 children who were now thriving in their own careers, and had weathered the devastating loss of his wife Margaret to cancer 3 years prior. He was methodical, careful with money, and had never made an impulsive decision in his life. That's what made his story so chilling to witness. After Margaret's funeral, Samuel had thrown himself into work with the dedication of a monk. His Victorian home in Didsbury became a fortress of solitude where he existed rather than lived. His daughter Emma worried about him constantly, calling every Sunday to check if he had eaten proper meals or spoken to another human being beyond work calls. His son James would visit monthly, always finding his father in the same chair, surrounded by the same routine, trapped in the same grief. It was Emma who finally convinced him to take that trip to Thailand. She had booked it as a surprise for his 53rd birthday, insisting that Margaret would have wanted him to see the world they had always planned to explore together. Samuel resisted for months, but eventually, the weight of his daughter's concern and his own suffocating loneliness pushed him toward that plane ticket. Thailand hit Samuel like a sensory explosion. The humid air of Bangkok carried scents of street food and jasmine, sounds of tuk-tuks and temple bells, colors more vibrant than anything he had seen in years of English grey skies. For the first week, he wandered like a ghost through temples and markets, taking photos he would never look at again, eating meals he couldn't taste through his numbness. That's when loneliness drove him to download Tinder. Sitting in that cramped internet cafe near Khao San Road, surrounded by backpackers half his age, Samuel created a profile with shaking fingers. He wasn't looking for love, he told himself. Just conversation, maybe dinner with someone who could show him the real Thailand, beyond the tourist facade. Her profile appeared like a vision designed specifically for his wounded soul. Pacharapon, 28 years old, with eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom and a smile that promised understanding. Her photos showed her feeding temple cats, teaching children in what looked like a rural school, and laughing with genuine joy that had been absent from Samuel's world for 3 years. Her bio was simple: looking for someone with a kind heart who values family and tradition. Their first conversation lasted 6 hours. Pacharapon, who insisted he call her Pat, seemed fascinated by his stories of English countryside and his late wife's garden. She shared her own dreams of opening a small restaurant, her devotion to her aging grandmother, and the financial struggles of supporting her extended family on a teacher's salary in Chiang Rai. Samuel found himself typing with more animation than he had felt in years, describing Margaret's rose bushes and how he still maintained them as a shrine to her memory. What struck him most was how Pat never pushed for personal information or seemed interested in his obvious wealth. When he mentioned his business, she asked about the work itself, not the profits. When he showed her photos of his home, she commented on the garden, not the property value. She seemed genuinely curious about his grief, offering insights from her Buddhist beliefs about loss and acceptance that resonated with his exhausted heart. Within 3 days, they had moved from Tinder to WhatsApp, then to video calls that stretched late into his Bangkok nights. Pat's face on his phone screen became the first thing he looked forward to each day. Her voice, softly accented and always gentle, guided him through virtual tours of her world in Chiang Rai province, near the Myanmar border. The connection felt so natural that when Pat mentioned her teaching salary had been delayed and she couldn't afford her grandmother's medicine, Samuel's offer to help felt like the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't a large amount, £200 transferred through Western Union, but Pat's tears of gratitude made him feel useful for the first time since Margaret's death. That first transfer was like opening a valve. Pat shared more of her struggles. The leaking roof of her family home, her younger brother's university fees, the small debts that kept her family trapped in poverty despite their hard work. Each story came with photos, documentation, and such genuine shame about asking for help that Samuel found himself insisting on sending money before she could even complete her requests. The amounts grew gradually logically: £300 for her grandmother's surgery, £500 for emergency car repairs when she needed to reach a sick relative, £800 for her brother's school fees. Each transfer felt justified, necessary, and deeply appreciated. Pat would video call him immediately after receiving each payment, sometimes crying with relief, always promising to pay him back when her financial situation improved. But here's where I need you to pause this story for a moment. Think about what you've heard so far. Put yourself in Samuel's position. Or maybe you recognize something from your own experience or someone you know. What details are starting to feel suspicious to you? Pause the video right now and write in the comments what red flags you're noticing, because I guarantee you're picking up on something that Samuel, blinded by loneliness and newfound purpose, couldn't see yet. The psychological trap was perfectly constructed. Pat never demanded money directly. Instead, she shared her life so completely that Samuel felt like he was part of her family. She sent photos of her grandmother blessing Samuel's picture at the local temple. She showed him her students drawing thank you cards to teacher Pat's kind English friend. She made him feel not like a donor, but like a beloved family member whose generosity was creating real change in real lives. Samuel's own family noticed the change in him immediately. During their Sunday call, Emma remarked that he sounded happier than he had in years. James commented that his father seemed to have regained some spark during their monthly visit. Samuel glowed with purpose as he described his friend in Thailand who was teaching him about Buddhist philosophy and showing him how interconnected lives could be. The requests evolved with masterful precision. Pat needed help with a small business loan to open her restaurant. The bank required foreign investment guarantees. Could Samuel provide a letter of credit? It seemed so reasonable, so temporary. Just his signature on documents that would unlock local funding for her dreams. Samuel's business experience told him to be careful. But Pat's tears and gratitude overruled his caution every time. 3 months into their relationship, Samuel made the decision that would change everything. He booked a flight to Chiang Rai to meet Pat in person, the woman who had become his reason for waking up each morning. His source of purpose and joy would finally be real, tangible, in his arms. Pat's response to his travel plans was everything he hoped for. She wept with joy on their video call, immediately making plans for his visit. She would show him her grandmother's village, introduce him to her students, take him to the temple where she prayed for his happiness daily. Samuel booked the most expensive hotel in Chiang Rai and began planning what felt like the most important trip of his life. The flight from Bangkok to Chiang Rai felt like traveling towards salvation. Samuel stared out the small plane window at the mountains of northern Thailand, clutching printouts of their WhatsApp conversations like love letters. He had withdrawn £2,000 in cash, planning to surprise Pat with enough money to fully fund her restaurant dream. In his mind, he was already planning their future together, perhaps splitting time between England and Thailand, finally giving his grief-stricken heart permission to love again. Chiang Rai Airport was smaller than he expected, more intimate. Samuel emerged from customs, scanning every face for the woman whose image had sustained him through months of healing. And there she was, exactly as beautiful as her photos, holding a sign with his name written in careful English letters, wearing a traditional Thai dress that made her look like a princess from his dreams. Their first embrace was everything 3 months of anticipation had promised. Pat felt small and fragile in his arms, smelling of jasmine and something sweetly tropical he couldn't identify. She looked up at him, with those eyes he had stared at through his phone screen countless times, now real and warm and focused entirely on him. The drive through Chiang Rai in Pat's small sedan was like entering a fairy tale. She pointed out landmarks, temples, the school where she taught, all while holding his hand and stealing glances at him like she couldn't believe he was really there. Samuel felt more alive than he had since Margaret's diagnosis, more hopeful than he had dared to be in years. Pat's apartment was modest but immaculate, decorated with photos of her extended family and small Buddhist shrines. She had prepared a traditional northern Thai dinner, spending what Samuel realized must have been a significant portion of her teaching salary on ingredients to welcome him. As they ate together, sharing stories and laughter, Samuel felt the last walls around his heart crumbling away. That night, as Pat fell asleep in his arms, Samuel stared at the ceiling and allowed himself to imagine a future he thought had died with Margaret. He could support Pat's dreams, bring her to England sometimes, maybe even relocate to Thailand permanently. His consulting business could operate remotely. His children would understand. Love had found him again in the most unexpected place, and he was ready to embrace it completely. The first few days in Chiang Rai were perfect. Pat took time off from teaching to show him around the province. They visited her grandmother's village, where ancient Thai women blessed their relationship and pressed fresh fruit into Samuel's hands. They explored temples where monks chanted prayers that seemed to cleanse Samuel's soul of years of accumulated grief. They walked through night markets where Pat translated every vendor's story, making Samuel feel connected to a community he had never imagined joining. But it was the arrival of Pat's family members that marked the beginning of the end of Samuel's fairy tale. First came her cousin Siripon, a sophisticated woman in her 30s who spoke perfect English and worked, she explained, in international finance in Bangkok. Siripon was warm, welcoming, and impressively knowledgeable about Western business practices. She praised Samuel's successful consulting firm and seemed genuinely interested in his expertise. Then came Cousin Kamon, a charming man about Samuel's age who had studied in Australia and understood the challenges of cross-cultural relationships. Cameron regaled Samuel with stories of successful Western Thai business partnerships and seemed fascinated by Samuel's industry experience. He asked thoughtful questions about investment opportunities in England and shared his own dreams of expanding his small import business internationally. More family members appeared throughout Samuel's 2-week stay. Pat's uncle Narong, who needed advice about expanding his rice farming operation. Her sister Ploy, who was studying English and dreamed of working in tourism. Her brother Chai, the university student whose fees Samuel had been helping with, who seemed eager to discuss business opportunities between Thailand and England. Each family member had a story, a dream, a small financial challenge that could be solved with just a bit of international support. And each of them treated Samuel not like a stranger, but like family. They invited him to family dinners, included him in decision-making discussions, asked his advice about everything from business investments to relationship problems. Samuel felt more valued and needed than he had in years. These people, Pat's people, saw him as more than just a grieving widower. They saw him as a mentor, a partner, a man whose experience and resources could help lift an entire family out of poverty. It felt like the most meaningful way he could honor Margaret's memory, by using the wealth they had built together to create opportunities for people who had shown him such genuine love and acceptance. The request started small and practical. Siripon's international finance work required a small emergency loan to complete a client transaction. The profit would benefit everyone, she explained, and Samuel's participation would demonstrate good faith for future business partnerships. Cameron's import business needed temporary capital to secure a large order that would establish him with European buyers. Samuel's investment would be fully repaid with interest once the goods were delivered. Each opportunity was presented with complete documentation, proper contracts, and enthusiastic family support. Pat was always present for these discussions, translating when necessary, but clearly proud of how her family was including Samuel in their business ventures. She would squeeze his hand under the table during these meetings, her eyes shining with gratitude for how generous and trusting he was being with her loved ones. Samuel found himself transferring increasingly large amounts back to England to gather funds for these investments. His business account, his personal savings, even some of the inheritance he had been saving for his children's future, all flowed toward these promising opportunities in northern Thailand. Each transfer felt like a step toward a new life, a chance to be part of something bigger than his own grief. The family's gratitude was overwhelming and constant. They threw a party to celebrate Samuel's investments, inviting neighbors and friends to meet the English businessman who was helping lift their community. Samuel gave speeches about international cooperation and cross-cultural friendship, translated by Pat, while dozens of local people applauded his generosity and vision. As his departure date approached, Samuel felt torn between his responsibilities in England and his new life in Thailand. Pat cried every time they discussed his leaving, and her family made it clear that they considered him part of their clan now. The business investments were progressing well, they assured him. Soon, there would be profits to share. And perhaps Samuel could consider relocating permanently to oversee their growing international operations. The flight back to Manchester felt like leaving paradise. Samuel clutched Pat's tearful goodbye letters and promises to video call him every day. He had invested nearly everything he owned in their shared future. but he felt richer than ever in hope and purpose. His depression seemed like a distant memory, replaced by excitement about building a new life with people who valued him not just as a partner, but as family. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because what happens next in Samuel's story will shock you. And I want you to be here for the conclusion. Also, drop a comment and let me know, have you or anyone you know ever experienced something similar? Not necessarily in Thailand, but any situation where generosity towards someone you loved turned into something much darker. Your stories help other people recognize these patterns before it's too late. The unraveling began 6 weeks after Samuel returned to England. Pat's daily video calls became less frequent, then sporadic, then filled with increasingly urgent crises that required immediate financial solutions. The restaurant loan had complications requiring additional guarantees. Siripon's international finance deal had hit regulatory snags, needing emergency funding. Cameron's import business faced customs issues that could be resolved with the right payments to the right officials. Each crisis felt legitimate, supported by documents that looked official and explanations that made logical sense. But Samuel's business instincts, dulled by loneliness and hope, began to sharpen as the requests multiplied and the promised returns never materialized. When he asked specific questions about timelines and documentation, Pat became tearful and hurt. How could he doubt her family after they had welcomed him so completely? Didn't he trust their love and commitment to their shared future? The first real crack in the facade came when Samuel tried to call Siripon directly to discuss her international finance project. The number Pat had given him was disconnected. When he asked Pat about this, she explained that Siripon had changed numbers due to security issues with her banking work. But Samuel's trained, suspicious mind noted that Pat's explanation came too quickly, too smoothly, like a prepared response. Samuel began doing what he should have done months earlier. He researched. He hired a private investigator in Bangkok to verify the businesses and people he had been investing in. He used his professional networks to check the legitimacy of the documents he had signed. He examined his bank statements with the cold, analytical eye he brought to his consulting work, not the warm, emotional perspective of a man in love. The truth, when it emerged, was devastatingly comprehensive. There was no international finance company employing Siripon. Cameron's import business existed only on paper. The university where Pat claimed to teach had no record of her employment. The restaurant she dreamed of opening had never applied for permits or business licenses. Even Pat's apartment, Samuel discovered, was a short-term rental, not her family home. But the cruelest revelation was about Pat herself. Her real name was Sunisa Kishbunsri, and she was part of a sophisticated romance scam operation that had been targeting lonely Western men for over 5 years. The family members Samuel had met were all part of the network, playing assigned roles with the skill of professional actors. The grandmother who had blessed their relationship, the students who had drawn thank you cards, even the neighbors who had celebrated his generosity. All were part of an elaborate performance designed to extract maximum money from emotionally vulnerable targets. Samuel's private investigator presented him with evidence that shattered every memory of his time in Chiang Rai. Photos of Pat or Sunisa with other Western men at the same restaurants where she had taken Samuel. Bank records showing that every penny he had transferred had been immediately moved through a network of accounts designed to obscure the money trail. Police reports from other men who had fallen for identical schemes, some losing their homes, their businesses, their children's inheritance. The woman Samuel thought he loved didn't exist. The family that had welcomed him was a criminal enterprise. The future he had been building was a carefully constructed lie designed to separate him from his life savings. In 6 months, he had lost nearly £200,000. His emotional stability and his faith in his own judgment. When Samuel finally confronted Pat with the evidence, her response revealed the true depth of the deception. No tears, no denials, just cold acknowledgement that he had been useful but was now used up. She informed him that continuing to expose their operation would result in complications for him, that certain officials in Thailand had records of his involvement in their business ventures that could be interpreted as money laundering or tax evasion. The woman, who had whispered sweet promises in his ear just weeks earlier, was now threatening him with criminal charges if he attempted to recover his money or warn other potential victims. Samuel realized he wasn't just a victim of financial fraud, but was now trapped in a web of potential legal consequences that could destroy what remained of his life. Samuel's journey back from financial and emotional devastation became a second education in human psychology, this time focused on his own recovery rather than others' manipulation. The shame was almost unbearable. How could a successful businessman, a man who had navigated complex corporate negotiations for decades, have been so completely fooled by such an obvious scam? His children's reactions when he finally confessed the truth were heartbreaking in their mixture of concern and disappointment. Emma cried for her father's pain, but couldn't hide her shock at his naivety. James struggled to balance support with frustration that his inheritance had been gambled away on a fantasy relationship. Both rallied to help him rebuild, but the family dynamics had shifted permanently. Samuel's first step toward recovery was accepting that his loneliness had made him desperate enough to ignore obvious warning signs. Grief had created a vulnerability that skilled predators had exploited with surgical precision. The shame wasn't in being lonely or wanting connection, but in allowing those natural human needs to override his judgment so completely. Working with a therapist who specialized in fraud recovery, Samuel began to understand the sophisticated psychological techniques that had been used against him. Love bombing, manufactured emergencies, social proof through fake family acceptance, incremental commitment escalation, all deployed by people who understood exactly how isolated widowers could be manipulated into financial compliance. The legal battle to recover his money proved futile but educational. Thai authorities showed little interest in pursuing a case against citizens who were scamming foreigners, especially when those foreigners had voluntarily transferred money and signed documents. Samuel's lawyers explained that romance scam networks operated with near impunity across international borders, protected by jurisdictional complications and official indifference. Samuel made the difficult decision to rebuild rather than pursue justice. He downsized his home, liquidated remaining assets, and focused on reconstruction rather than revenge. His consulting business, neglected during his months of emotional chaos, required intensive effort to restore client confidence and rebuild professional relationships. But the most important work was internal. Samuel had to learn to trust his instincts again, To distinguish between genuine human connection and skilled manipulation, he joined support groups for fraud victims, where he met others who had lost everything to romance scams, investment frauds, and other confidence games that preyed on fundamental human needs for love and belonging. Through these groups, Samuel discovered that his story wasn't unique or even unusual. Romance scam networks were operating globally, targeting millions of lonely people with increasingly sophisticated techniques. The Internet had made it possible for skilled criminals to identify and exploit vulnerable individuals with precision that would have been impossible in previous generations. Samuel began volunteering with fraud prevention organizations, sharing his story to help others recognize the warning signs he had missed. Speaking to groups of divorced and widowed people, he learned to transform his humiliation into education, his loss into others' protection. The unexpected turn in Samuel's story came almost 2 years after his return from Thailand. During one of his fraud prevention presentations in London, he met Detective Inspector Sarah Whitfield, who specialized in international fraud cases. Sarah had been tracking the network that had targeted Samuel, building cases against multiple romance scam operations across Southeast Asia. Sarah's investigation had identified Samuel as a key witness whose detailed documentation and evidence could help build prosecutable cases against the criminals who had destroyed his financial life. More importantly, Sarah's personal interest in Samuel's story grew beyond professional necessity. She was a recently divorced woman in her 40s who understood both the vulnerability that had made Samuel susceptible to manipulation and the strength required to rebuild after such devastating betrayal. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of human frailty, rather than desperate need and manufactured crisis. Sarah appreciated Samuel's honesty about his mistakes and his commitment to preventing others from suffering similar losses. Samuel valued Sarah's professional competence and personal integrity, qualities that stood in stark contrast to the deception he had experienced. Working together on the fraud case, Samuel and Sarah developed a partnership that extended beyond law enforcement. They created educational programs for vulnerable populations, wrote articles about romance scam prevention, and lobbied for stronger international cooperation in prosecuting cross-border fraud networks. Their relationship became Samuel's proof that genuine connection was possible after betrayal, that love could exist without desperation, and that trust could be rebuilt on foundations of honesty rather than fantasy. Sarah never asked him for money, never created emergencies requiring his intervention, never made him feel responsible for her happiness or financial security. The criminal case against Samuel's scammers never reached prosecution, but the investigation led to the disruption of their network and the prevention of future victimizations. Samuel's detailed evidence helped identify other victims and led to warnings that protected potential targets. His loss, while never recovered, became meaningful through its contribution to others' protection. Samuel's story ends not with financial recovery or romantic vindication, but with something more valuable: wisdom earned through suffering and shared through service. He learned that love requiring financial proof isn't love, that family members who only appear when money is needed aren't family, and that genuine connection doesn't require constant crisis to maintain intensity. Today, Samuel Brooks lives modestly but contentedly in a smaller home in Manchester. His relationship with Sarah has grown into something sustainable and honest. His children have forgiven his mistakes and admire his recovery. His work helping fraud victims has given his life purpose that transcends his own losses. Samuel's message to anyone facing loneliness, grief, or the desperate desire for connection is simple. Your need for love and belonging is natural and valid. But criminals understand these needs and will exploit them with ruthless efficiency. Take time to verify before you trust. Ask questions before you invest. And remember that genuine love doesn't require financial sacrifice to prove itself. The most important lesson from Samuel's nightmare is that recovery is possible, that mistakes don't define us, and that even the most devastating betrayals can become sources of strength and wisdom when we choose to learn from them rather than hide from them. If you found Samuel's story valuable, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more true stories about human resilience in the face of deception. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts about romance scams, or better yet, share this video with anyone you know who might be vulnerable to these tactics. Sometimes the best way to protect the people we love is to show them the experiences of people who learned these lessons the hard way. Together, we can make sure fewer people fall victim to predators who profit from human loneliness and hope.